Great. Welcome, everybody, to the session on innovative financing for EBA. My name is Wendy Atieno, and I work with IUCN's climate change team. We're coming together at least after a long day of talking about EBA and how to scale up. And I'm very excited to hear from everyone's perspective on how to really integrate the private sector. Just before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. We had started talking about that before. The session is being recorded, so please do note that. We ask you to mute yourselves when you're not speaking and also to have your videos off when the presenters are presenting. There will be a discussion session a little bit further in, and that's a time then we can all just convene together kind of more community and mimic as best as possible a room together. We'll also have during that discussion opportunity for questions. So please, as the presentations are going ahead, feel comfortable to type your questions in the chat. Next slide, please. So this session is on innovative financing for EBA. There are two session objectives, looking at exploring the landscape for business engagement in EBA, as well as discussing innovative solutions and opportunities for adapting EBA at scale. As Louise had shared during the pitch, we know that there's a lot of private sector engagement and investment in EBA, but this is still one of the more challenging barriers to mainstreaming EBA, and it's affecting the long-term sustainability of EBA. At the same time, more engagement of private sector could trigger the most transformative shift in the uptake and mainstreaming of EBA. So for this session, we're looking at learning more about successful private sector engagement, looking at the challenges linked to this and ways to overcome them. And we're hoping to hear a lot from your experience and the presenter's experience. It's a 50-minute session organized by GIZ and the Global EBA Fund Secretariat, comprised of UNEP and IUCN. We'll start with an overview on private sector mechanisms for EBA, looking at the main challenges and opportunities, followed by two case studies on private sector. Do you mind going to the next slide? Followed by two case studies on private sector and EBA from our colleagues from the Blue Finance and the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. And then, as I said earlier, there's going to be about 20 minutes. It's 19 minutes to be exact, so we have to keep time. 19 minutes for discussion and Q&A, and we'll have further perspectives from two colleagues from UNEP and from Instituto de Montana. And now I'd like to invite my colleague, Dorothée Hare. Dorothée is a manager of Oceans and Climate Change at IUCN and also serves as a manager for the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility. So BNCFF supports the development of sound investable blue natural capital projects with clear ecosystem service benefits based on multiple income streams and appropriate risk-return profiles. Dorothée provides expert advice on nature-based solutions benefits. And if you came in at the beginning, she was kind of talking about it earlier, and challenges for blue natural capital projects. Today, Dorothée will be sharing with us innovative financing mechanisms, particularly private sector mechanisms for EBA, and the main challenges and opportunities. Thank you, Dorothée.
Great, thank you, Wendy, so much for the kind introduction, and I'll be sharing my screen. Yeah, I want to talk you through a little bit sort of also my own experience of venturing from the conservation side into the private sector finance angle. And yeah, giving you a few reflection and ideas on this topic. I think we've seen that, or at least from various stakeholders, whether it's the big multilateral development banks, whether it's sort of our NGO colleagues or the think tanks, there's a lot of discussion around innovative financing models, and more we now see clear projects going forward. So that's a really exciting element of this. And why are we seeing this? Because no matter which graph or statistics you pull up, they always talk about an investment gap, whether it's conservation, whether it's the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, or whether it is also in this case sort of the EBA effort. And it often comes back to the conclusion that, well, whether it's the 300 to 400 and so forth billion gap, that we need the private sector and private sector finance to really come to the table and help sort of really drive finance and funding into further EbA and sort of nature-based solution project at large. And I think I like this sort of overview a lot because it shows in quite, a nice way of what is the sort of the variety of financial instruments that can be used across the scale. And at least from the conservation world and myself, I was very much used to the orange part for a long time of my professional work, and now sort of slowly moving into this greener and bluer side. And again, not entirely sure how familiar everyone is with the different terminologies, etc. But when you go into sort of the greener rectangulars here, it's sort of the concessional finance, where they have better conditions, are not sort of stringent, if you like, than if you really go on to sort of the full green and bluer side, which is the mechanisms that sort of expect really the market returns and run on very sort of tight conditions, if you like. And I think terminology I also wanted to introduce here is blended finance, because that is something, at least I've seen, being used a lot in sort of various conversations, or you see it in the various media, social media blogs, etc. And it's basically the idea here how we can use, in this case, the sort of more concessional part, or the grant funding as well, to leverage a lot of the more commercial money and sort of bringing in the other players that so far haven't come to the table to really work on NBS, etc. And there are various mechanisms that I'm sure you might hear throughout the session on sort of how such a blended vehicle or blended structure could look like. And as Wendy said, what we are trying to do, and I'll show a slide in a minute, with the BNCFF is indeed help sort of drive with grant funding some of the great project work that is happening, but might still not be fully ready yet to receive this sort of from an impact investor, for example, some support where we can help along. But I also want to sort of caution a little bit, because I've seen or observed a bit the trend to sort of thinking that private finance is suddenly the silver bullet and the panacea that's going to resolve all our funding and financing issues we had in the past. And because ultimately, no matter which private actor you're engaging with, what kind of financial instrument is being used, they want a return on investment. Down the line, someone wants sort of their money back. And I think whether you talk about equity, you start hearing about, well, they need exit options, a debt investor, they need predictable cash flows. And all sort of the list that I show there when we talk about bankable conservation projects, they need this return on investment, as I said, they need the protection against investment risk. And suddenly, at least for me, you enter a whole new world of language and sort of actors to facilitate. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity, very exciting, but I think it's also to be reasonable enough to know that for once, government funding, whether it's internal budget or supporting developing countries, we cannot let them off the hook, right? This is not sort of replacing some of these increases that we also need to see in the public spending. And I think here is an interesting graph I found recently, and why I think this also the line about the predictable cash flow, because if you look at this, it shows the sort of NBS transactions applying to various business model. What is it that drives these sort of businesses and activities? And it's to a large degree sort of the known, the tangible market opportunities that we know around commodities and carbon credits, and then sort of to a lesser degree a bit more the sort of payment for ecosystem services. And I think there again the adaptation community or adaptation focused project as such have a bit more of a struggle, but because of sort of the less tangible assets that are known to the current market of being traded and sold and so forth. But nevertheless, I think the exciting part that at least, and as you could see from the introduction, I am focused on the ocean, sort of the coastal marine world, is this green-gray or nature-based solutions within the green-gray context. Because here we all know that at the coast, of course, adaptation plays an incredibly important role, and they're looking at the opportunities where there will be trillions going into infrastructure in the next years. And it's not just about sort of reducing the risk for biodiversity, but I think it's this flip side really towards the long-term positive impact measuring, where of course EbA comes in very strongly as well. And here looking at this sort of different actors, again, from the maybe smaller ticket sizes around an impact investor, the nevertheless more traditional conservation/EbA project, and then again embedded in broader infrastructure models that are, for example, again supported by the bigger multilateral development banks or otherwise. Another topic that I also wanted to raise is when engaging with the counterparts in terms of finance or even insurances, it comes down to the data. And of course, there is a sort of adjusting certain models of how benefits, costs, etc. are calculated. And of course, also the expectations vis-a-vis certain returns. And at least, in the last few days, actually, I've listened to a few presentations where I hear the sort of the bigger finance players saying, we need to reduce the deal size. They haven't really said how much, because often there is a discrepancy that the projects that we foster through NBS or adaptation are rather small size. And the big investors want the bigger money, the tens and 50 million that, of course, are often very difficult for the sort of NBS EbA projects to materialize. Anyway, that I think is a very interesting and positive signal. But I think it's, again, what I meant with the data is it's not just the risk screening, but this sort of measuring the impacts, because for the planning purposes, but also really for comparing vis-a-vis where do I invest in, what do I get out, and for making the case. Because in personal experiences, I know there's a lot of interest in NBS and EbA, but when it comes to really the sort of the bottom line, they first want to see that the numbers line up. And I think that is still something we need to work towards. And I think the other question is the KPIs. What KPIs are we using for measuring the impacts vis-a-vis adaptation? Because for carbon, with all its difficulties, we have one, and that is comparable everywhere. And on adaptation, again, there are different ecosystems, different regions. How do we deal with that? But last but not least, I did want to come back to, again, the work that we're doing with the BNCFF, and actually the bottom right graph is from Nicholas' work that you hear about in a little bit, to sort of that we try to the extent possible to dissect how these projects look like, how they are financed, how they change from the sort of current business as usual scenario, and they move into sort of more innovative setup. And also, how do these businesses sort of look at what we often hear, the different revenue streams, alternative livelihoods, and how sort of, you know, these enterprises or new corporations, small medium enterprises, how they can be brought to life. And really excited that we were able to help a few more to come in the future. And if you're interested in working on the blue space, we have these blueprints available, as well as sort of other information. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, and thank you for that call to action about return on investments. It was also very helpful to hear then, thinking about leveraging grant funding into blended finance. A lot of us here who are FEBA members work broadly with grant funding and public finance, and so it's useful to think creatively about how we can mix this with private sector investment. And also specifically, we think a lot about the benefits. We do talk about cost benefit analyses, but I don't think we do a very good job of articulating in the language of the private sector. So thinking about numbers and return on investment. So I really appreciate that call to action. Thank you very much. Up next, we have our first case study, who Dorothy had mentioned. So Nicolas Pascal is the executive director and co-founder of Blue Finance, a social enterprise which aims to design, finance, and implement collaborative management partnerships for marine protected areas, or MPAs, that can attract and scale up impact investment. Nicolas's expertise combines marine science, economics, finance, and policy, and all of this is aimed at protecting marine ecosystems. Blue Finance also received funding from the Global EBA Fund and the Blue Natural Capital Funding Facility. They were amongst the first cohort of grantees for the Global EBA Fund, and they're working to implement a project in the Philippines, which Nicolas will share today.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for inviting Blue Finance to present our approach. So very briefly, so I'm Nicolas. I'm the executive director of Blue Finance. I think it's important to mention the background of Blue Finance. So we're social enterprise. Today we want to maintain it very small. We are a team of more or less 60 people, mostly field workers, and the head office with 10 professionals. It's important to highlight that the profile of this professional is mixed between science, marine science, and investment banking. Okay, so that's maybe what makes the particularity of Blue Finance is this interesting mix of different profiles, which can be challenging in terms of communication many times. But this is what we're doing. So what is Blue Finance? So Blue Finance is a social enterprise, NGO. Our main mandate is to manage marine protected areas on behalf of government. And the MPAs, or marine protected areas, that we manage have to be bankable. Okay, so that's the particularity of what we're doing. We want our MPAs to have the possibilities and the capacities to become financially sustainable in the medium term and become progressively independent from donors and philanthropic in the medium term also. So that's exactly what we are doing. We're not doing this in 200 sites. We are focusing the efforts in 10 MPAs worldwide. And so far, we've quite good success. So I will bring you through this project and our initiative through these different slides. Next slide, please. Can I do it? Okay. So today, as I mentioned, we manage 5 MPAs directly, actively, and we have 5 more MPAs under preparation. So with an impact, as Dorothy mentioned, of what we call our KPIs, key performance indicators, which are asked by our donors and investors. So we have to quantify some of the impacts we have on the ecological side. How many hectares are we effectively protecting or regenerating? How many new jobs are we creating, and so on. Okay. I would say in terms of the EBA, and because we have a very short time, I will summarize how our model works. We can summarize it through 4 pillars that we need inside our MPA. The first one, I'm trying to put my screen bigger. My shares. The first one is, next, previous slide. Thank you. So the first one is really a long negotiation with governments on the co-management agreement. We need to have a clear concession from government to be able to have a day-to-day management of the MPAs and to engage funding and to engage people on the long term. Okay, so we call it concession because there's no lawyers maybe in the room. It's not officially a concession. It's just a delegation of a day-to-day management. Government doesn't transmit any of the core function of regulation or property in this delegation. But that's a core aspect for any kind of impact investment or any kind of blended finance facility we want to set up, is to have a clear mandate for the day-to-day management. The second one, as I mentioned, is really to implement and to have in the MPAs an innovative or sustainable revenue model. Okay, we need to create revenues for the MPAs, and there are capacities to create these revenues. Okay, so we have to build them. We have to find the right models. So usually the models we're using in the 10 MPAs are around ecotourism. So the classic admission fees that we're trying to improve and to improve the revenue per visitor, always on a sustainable way, always under a carrying capacity limit and very strict good practices. We are working also on the blue carbon side through mangrove restoration and conservation, so RED+, and certified carbon credits. We are exploring now with microfinance and artisanal aquaculture if we can work projects around the MPS. So we are developing some kind of a blue economy around the MPS, so we can recreate these revenues for the protected areas management entity, so our entity, to become financially sustainable. Based on this, obviously, we don't do this as Blue Finance, as a social enterprise, but we do this in collaboration with local partners. I think this is the important point here. We're not talking about an international NGO managing a public space or public good on behalf of government as an international entity. What we are negotiating is always a compendium, a group of local partners, so can be community organization, people organization, NGOs, and Blue Finance having the long-term mandate for the MPS. So that also guarantees us a well embedded governance locally. Okay. And the fourth one, which is why we are also talking today, is a blended finance facility that will provide the adequate upfront capital for the MPA. So here we are talking of putting together impact investors, donors, as it was the case with the BNCFF we did in Belize. We put together Mirova Natural Capital, we put together BNCFF and other donors to finance the upfront capital of the Belize Turnef MPA. And the money was going through capital for vessels, for scientific equipment, but also for ecotourism facilities and for the blue carbon credits. So it's both for improving the management of the MPA and also creating the revenues in the future, so we can become financially independent, and also in that case we can pay back some of the investors. Next slide, and I think I'm very close to the end. Thank you. So okay, I will skip this one. So MPAs have a capacity. Some MPAs have a capacity to generate revenues. Okay, so in the case of our MPAs is definitively a yes, and we are proving it. Belize, Philippines, we are already generating revenues there. So that's the good news that we can share, and investors are quite satisfied with the impacts and with the returns, and they are ready to go beyond and maybe invest now on the whole facility for the 10 MPS. Next slide. I think we can skip this one. So the market opportunities and blue carbon and ecotourism. The next one. Okay. So this is the one I wanted to present, is the MPA investment facility, which is quite innovative. So instead of going project per project, what we are proposing to the investors and donors is to have only one shop a facility where they can say, okay, I want to invest in Southeast Asia, or I want to invest in the 10 MPAs, and you can go through only one shop window for the investment. So we're putting together, as the same as we did for Belize, impact investors, so providing debt, so providing a loan. So I have to be very careful with the terms here. It means that we have to pay back, so it's a real commitment. And we're putting them together on the same table with grantors, like the Blue Natural Capital finance facility that Dorothée is managing. And the point is to use the catalytic capital and the impact investment to implement capacities for the MPAs, both on the scientific and monitoring and surveillance side, and also on the ecotourism side or blue carbon side, or other revenues that we are developing. So this is a work in progress. Hopefully soon we can announce you that the facility first round of financing is approximately $25 million US will be closed, I hope soon. And that will be a very great news for our MPAs. And we hope that will become a blueprint for many other MPAs in the world that have these capacities to create revenues with the right capacity building, coaching, and investment behind it. So that's it from my side.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining. I know you mentioned that there was an emergency, so really appreciate it. I think in terms of takeaways from the session, from your presentation rather, is really the 4 pillars that you've highlighted, and having a clear mandate of management, I think is very useful, because then that really drives the ownership of the project, but also looking at tangible revenue models and the inclusion of the local partners, right, and focusing particularly on performance. Of course, not forgetting the initial injection of funding from the capital that you get at the beginning. So I think there's lessons here for us to draw for the public sector as well. And I really appreciate your presentation. Next up, we're going to have Alcides Andrade, who is the Executive of Financial Institutions and Strategic Programs at the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. Mr. Andrade is part of the GCF-funded project Ecosystem-Based Adaptation to Increase Climate Resilience in the Central American Dry Corridor and the arid zones of the Dominican Republic. He will be sharing his experience on engaging the private sector in this work. And just as a reminder for everyone, please do share your questions in the chat and we'll get to them following this presentation. Thank you, Mr. Andrade.
Well, hello, everybody. My name again is Alcides Andrade. Good evening. I don't know what time is over there, or good afternoon, or good evening. I'm really not sure about it. Okay, I work in the private sector, so my presentation is going to be focused on the private sector. I'm going to talk briefly about the ecosystem-based adaptation program to increase climate resilience in the dry corridor of the Central American region and the arid zones of the Dominican Republic. For a little bit of context, okay, let me see. A little bit of context, CABE is a Central American Bank for Economic Integration. You can see this little blue spot over there between South and North America. That's our zone of impact. It was created in the 1960s, and we have 8 regional members and 7 non-regional members. We have offices in Argentina, Spain, Republic of China, Taiwan, and Korea. So what is the objective of the program? The program main objective is to strengthen the capacity of climate change adaptation for people facing climate risk, local governments, small farmers, commercial farmers, MSMEs of the region, entrepreneurs, and I can say everybody in the region, because we are planning to, actually we have technical assistance to have some capacity buildings through all the region. This will be achieved by accelerating the adoption of ecosystem-based adaptation, measures that will increase resilience to extreme weather events such as severe droughts and extreme rainfall. This is the region of intervention. As you can see, it's the one marked in purple and blue. Nevertheless, the region is much wider. If we calculate all the dry corridor zone, it's about to 10 to 15 million people, and it's really big. And the total area is practically half of the Central American area, so it's really big. That's why we selected 7 catchment areas, and that 7 catchment areas is the focus point of this intervention. The components and the program resources. This is a project that is going to be funded partially by the CABE and partially by GCF. The technical assistance resources, the non-reimbursable resources, are $84 million, all put through GCF. The guarantee resources are $30 million, likewise from GCF, and the credit resources is a blended mechanism, as I think Dorothy told previously. The GCF has some concessional funding, and we have I cannot say that's commercial funding, but it's a little bit higher than the GCF. It's approximately $102 million, and the total project is $270 million. To this, we have to add the participation of all the governments in the region. It's going to be approximately $250, $260 million, the total project. Now let's see the implementation. This is going to be a real challenge. Without any doubt, this is going to be quite hard, but that's why we really think this is the way that we have to act. As you can see, the GCF and CABE, they both have a participation. They're going to blend the resources before the resources go to the financial institutions. In the current days, we work with about approximately 70 financial institutions, more or less, but not all the financial institutions work in this zone. This area, particular of the dry corridor and in the Dominican Republic, it's really poor people, really poor zone. There are not so many regulated financial institutions. There are more like microfinances and something like that. So it's really hard to be there. That's why we also have a guarantee facility, because many of these MSMEs and rural farmers, they don't have collateral. With the guarantee facility, we expect to calculate to address all the MSMEs in the region, at least at the region we have selected. So this is going to be a really challenge. It's going to be really complicated, but we truly believe this is the right way. And then with the technical assistance, it's going to be really, I think the word is really likely that we're going to surpass all of our mandate. We're going to have capacity building. We're going to have capacity building for the local governments, for the community in general. We can have a landscape intervention. We can have a project demonstration of the EbA technologies, a technical system for the financial institutions, technical system for the MSMEs, the project management unit, and something that really like is we're going to develop a knowledge hub with this project, because we're going to learn from the positive and negative things that we can learn from the project. And last but not least, this is some of the expected benefits. Help more than 1 million people directly and 1.3 million people indirectly, about 50,000 square kilometers, the benefit area. We're going to reduce the deforestation, improve the livelihoods of small and medium MSMEs. We're going to reduce more than approximately 55 million tons of greenhouse gases and provide access to financial and non-financial services. So as you can see, the project is going to be really challenging. It's going to be really hard, but we truly believe as an MDB that this is the way and this is where we have to be. So this is for me right now. If you have any doubts, any questions, I will be glad to share it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrade. Really appreciate your presentation. And for me, it's really helpful to particularly hearing about the blended finances coming up again. Again, my perspective is coming from the public sector, right, and working really on grants and funding. So really thinking about the ways to leverage that. But also, as you pointed out, looking at technical assistance and providing that to different stakeholders, as well as I appreciate the emphasis on learning and not just focusing on the positive things that you learn, right? But also looking at the negative, what lessons, what negative lessons, what mistakes are you getting from the projects? Because then through that, we can able to know what to avoid in the future. So really appreciate your presentation. And so with that, I would like to open the discussion session, right? So really, again, would love to hear from you all who are participating. You've listened to 3 presentations so far. What are questions that are coming up for you from this discussion? What are some of your perspectives to share from the work that you do, representing the various organizations that you do and the various perspectives that you have? And while you're thinking about your questions and coming up with them, the chat, of course, is open for those. I'd like to invite Celia Harvey, who led a report on harnessing nature to build climate resilience, scaling up the use of EbA. And this report was prepared by UNEP as part of the Global EbA Fund. So Celia, for you, I think my question is, having worked on this report and gotten a lot of perspective from different actors, what qualities did you find that make EbA attractive for financing? And then a complementary question is, what is required to encourage a wide variety of actors to invest in EbA solutions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Wendy. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. As Wendy said, my name is Celia Harvey, and I've been working with UNEP for the last year on a report to identify both barriers and opportunities for scaling up action on EbA. Barney highlighted the report earlier this morning. We have the executive summary ready, and we will be publishing the full report later this month. And I think what I'll do is just highlight a couple of the key messages from the report that relate to financing and scaling up, and also to Wendy's question. First of all, our report shows that EbA has the potential to significantly enhance the resilience of society to climate change and should form a central component of both national and international adaptation efforts. Yet, despite the fact that there's growing interest among policymakers, among donors, scientists, and practitioners, the current rate and scale of implementation is really falls far short of the potential. There's an urgent need for much greater finance and much greater action on the ground to harness the full potential of EBA for putting the world on both a climate resilient and nature positive pathway. Second, there are many obstacles that are currently preventing the use and scaling up of EBA, including knowledge barriers, technical barriers, political support, etc. But of these barriers, the most important one, without a doubt, is the lack of finance. That's both the most significant barrier and also the most commonly encountered barrier encountered by practitioners on the ground. There's currently insufficient funding both from the public sector and from the private sector. And we've seen a recent report by WRI, that has shown that less than 2% of all international climate finance right now is going towards EBA, and that's woefully inadequate. So in order to mobilize much greater finance and action on EBA, it's going to be very important to create a much more supportive policy and regulatory framework for EBA. And it's going to be very important to broaden the constituency of actors who support EBA. In particular, we need to be reaching out more to the business community, the insurance sector, and the financial sector. And there's also a need to put into action all of the innovative financial approaches we've just heard about. So they're exciting examples of how to use green bonds, blue bonds, resilience bonds to channel finance towards EBA. There are opportunities for debt for climate and debt for nature swaps, in which low-income countries can receive debt relief in exchange for action on climate change, including action on EBA. And there are many exciting initiatives underway to encourage businesses to disclose their climate risks and the nature risks, and to invest more in EBA to address those risks simultaneously. And finally, there are many opportunities, as we've heard, to leverage more financial resources for EBA from the insurance sector. And the insurance sector can do this by providing discounts to clients who use EBA to reduce their vulnerability, or they can also support EBA by creating more innovative insurance mechanisms that support the conservation, restoration, and management of ecosystems that are important for adaptation. So those are just a few ideas, but if you're interested in learning more, please do look at the executive summary and look out for the UNEP report that's coming out later this month. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celia. And the point on insurance I find particularly interesting because I think right now insurance disincentivizes some of these approaches, right? You're penalized, but really then integrating EBA as a solution can really increase the attractiveness. So thank you so much for sharing that. I see that we have someone who's raised their hand. Sorry, I'm not able to see names. So go ahead and share your question. Yes, Mauricio, go ahead and share your question.
Thank you so much. No worries. So it's a lot of information, and good to see Celia, and really looking forward to dive into this report, which we exchanged about previously. But in this case, I had a specific question to Alcides with a regional focus on the dry corridor. And I'm wondering, Alcides, if how this large project is going to input into the NDC commitments of the climate plans of all the countries in the region you're going to be working with, biodiversity targets also under the new framework, and even the SDGs, given the size, the scope, and the amount of resources. Thank you.
So yes, actually we are gonna work with all the ministers of environment and development of the region. I'm using some names of that, but all the policies that we're gonna develop it with them, and with the committees that are gonna be a structure for this. So this is not work that we're gonna do it alone and with our PMU. We're gonna coordinate the work and all the efforts with the ministers of all the regions. So yes, we are gonna target all these gender policies or the EBAs, the policies. We're gonna try to be regional policies. So we're gonna work together with them.
Great, thank you very much. I'd also like to invite an intervention from the audience today. And we have Mireya Gallardo, who is a co-director for the Instituto de Montana in Peru, who as an organization have been working on EBA from the very beginning, particularly implementing a project on EBA in mountain ecosystems in Peru. Mirella, I know you've been working also on another project on ecosystem services retribution mechanism, and I would love to hear from your perspective, working on the ground and implementing this project on EBA, what you're drawing, any particular example you would like to share based on your experience as one question, but also as well, just any reactions you have to what has been shared today.
Thank you, Wendy. Hello, everybody. Nice to be sharing these ideas with you. Yeah, I find very interesting what we have been hearing during the session. It's always a challenge to find financing or funding for EBA and all this kind of projects. The case I wanted to comment has done some progress, but it's still a challenge. And it's not really another project, because we are working on a EBA mountain EBA project in the mountains. But in a watershed, there are many actors, many stakeholders, and funding can also arise from here. And that's the case. I wanted to talk a bit about the ecosystem services retribution mechanism. It is approved. It's approved by the Peruvian government by a law as a voluntary mechanism for investing in areas where ecosystem services are produced or provided. Although the ecosystem services are many, water regulation has done the more progress, including a law enhanced by another law. This is a second law enhanced by the water and sanitation sector, assigning all water supply companies the task to invest in ecosystem services conservation. So this is what happened in the Cañete watershed, where our project is also taking place. This financing or funding mechanism is doing progress with the EMAPA Cañete Water Supply Company. And we were like the link between communities and the water supply company in order to find how to invest this mechanism and have more water regulation services. And this is happening in several water supply companies all over the country. Money is already collected in a different bank account, and this is being invested in the upper part of watersheds, where land is mostly owned by traditional Andean communities or Amazonian communities as well. But this is also a challenge because ecosystem services retribution mechanism for water regulation is also necessary for many other producers, like hydropower plants, agriculture producers, livestock producers, fisher producers, among others. And the question that arises about the topic are, can the mechanism be effective for these other kind of producers as well? How should we approach to the private sector in order to reach the goal of establishing the mechanism? Who should do it is also a question, because it's the state, or the protected area stakeholder that should assume a role on that. On the other hand, the state already charges the producer for using the water. So other questions arise. Other questions arise, like if it should be conducted as environmental and social responsibility activities, for example. On the other hand, other ecosystem services are also being provided, included, for example, the landscape beauty used by tourism operators normally willing to contribute to maintain the landscape beauty. So some steps are being taken to implement the mentioned law in these other services, but more efforts need to be done in this regard. And this also the case I wanted to provide you, to tell you, because there are many questions, no? How to do this approach to the private sector that also were treated or were presented before. That's it, Wendy. I hope it helps.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mia. Yeah, that was very helpful. I think, as you're talking, and we talk a lot about integrating EBA into policy. And one discussion that we had within the team that I really appreciated was asking, what does that really mean? What does it mean once it's integrated into policy? How does that look like? And I appreciate the example you shared, because that's one way that you're looking at these policy instruments, ways that then you can actually really operationalize the work that's being done at the policy level, is looking at working with service providers and really then having that feed into the broader work. So I do appreciate the example. Louise had shared in the chat that we have time for just one more question. The session is supposed to end at 12:25 my time, which would be 6:25 Berlin time. And then we have a break before we have to go back to the plenary at 35 past the hour. I see Laura shared a question for Mirella. Are the funds that water utilities have under MERESE framework sufficient to put forth nature-based solutions? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. Thank you. They collect not a lot of funds, but we are like working community by community. The first year, about $40,000 fund were collected, and actions were already implemented in one community. There are more than 10 communities in the natural protected area with whom we are working on this kind of mechanism, but this is continuous, it's a law, it will be done like always, so community by community can be benefit.
Thank you, Mirella. And so I do have one question, particularly for Nicholas and for Alcides, because you're working in the private sector. What advice do you have for us who are working in the public sector about ways to get the private sector more engaged? We talk a lot about it, but want to hear from you. How can we engage the private sector more in the work that we do?
It's a really hard question, because I think the public policies that you can develop, they're going to help us to implement this in the private sector. If we don't have the public policies, and we talk a lot of public policies, but if there are not public policies, it's going to be really hard for us. Yeah, the state or the governments had to lead the path to these interventions. If they don't do it, it's going to be really hard. It's not going to be enough private money that is going to be interested in acting upon.
Thank you very much. Nicholas, I don't know if you, okay.
Yeah, yes, I'm still. I think I will echo Alcides. Yeah, I think we need some blended finance, so catalytic finance, and before we can unlock private capital. But at the same time, I will add for the blue economy specifically. So revenue model, the bankability of a project is a critical point, and we don't have so much of them. And the second one is the entrepreneurship. Okay, we mostly dealing with a lot of NGO conservation world initiatives. So the entrepreneurship here is a very critical point. That's from my side.
Thank you very much. And with that, we've come to time. I really appreciate the contributions that everyone has shared. I know for me personally, there's a lot of takeaways and there's a lot for me to stew over and think about. I think as I'm trying to summarize the takeaways, I can only come up with bullet points. So really thinking about integration, blended finance, return on investment, looking at insurance and the policy instruments, as well as what has just been shared now, looking at enabling policy frameworks, which I think for me is affirming to hear because I work in the policy space, as well as looking then at making bankable revenue models. So I really want to thank our speakers today, Dorothy Hare, Nicolas Pascal, Alcides Andrade, Celia Harvey, and Mireia Gallardo. Thank you very much for your participation and for sharing your perspectives. Also want to say a very big thank you to my colleagues who've been working behind the scenes, Louise Richter from GIZ, my colleagues Nora Yang from UNEP and Yulia Rubleva from IUCN, both of whom work on the Global EBA Fund, as well as thank you to all of you for your attention and participation today. Would love to continue these conversations and just keep this ongoing. It's, of course, a very key question. Every time we talk about the work that we do, the biggest challenge is financing. So it's really good to hear and to continue these conversations on how we can continue to finance EBA and upscale and mainstream the work that we do. So I think we're taking a 10-minute break. Well, now it's 9 minutes, and then we'll be back into the main plenary.
Wendy?
Yes, go ahead.
Actually not. Actually, we are going back to plenary right now.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Please go to back to the main event webpage and join the closing remarks, which are going on right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.